The last fly in my series of Carrie Stevens streamers that I've been doing for the last few weeks is called the Ladykiller. It's a standard Carrie Stevens pattern from the standpoint of the tag, the body, and the rib, and the tail, how all that's tied in. Unique features on this one is the cheek is the shoulder is a chicken breast feather, similar to the supervisor that I did a few weeks back. It's a red chicken breast feather, I should say a white dyed red chicken breast feather. I don't have any of those, so what I'm using is called a black laced wing. It's a whiting soft hen hackle, and I kind of like it. The contrast with the black right around the shoulder and everything I thought was just kind of interesting. So that's the Ladykiller. I don't have a whole lot of history on this fly. Doing a little bit of research, I just couldn't find that much information about it, but I just thought it was a very pretty pattern. I like the body and the shoulder on this, and the yellow actually contrasts pretty nicely with all of the red in this fly. Plus the fact the head of the fly has double bands of red thread on it. She's known for generally putting in one single band of red thread right in the middle of the head, but this one actually has a double red band of thread in the head, which is kind of interesting. So that's the Ladykiller. I'll go ahead and get started. We'll start by placing our hook in the vise. Like all the other Carrie Stevens streamers that I've been tying in the last few weeks in this series, this is a Mustad L87 number 4. It is a 9X long streamer hook. I'm going to go ahead and debarb it, and then I'll attach my thread. The Ladykiller has a red floss body, so I'm going to use a white floss as the underbody on this so that it doesn't darken up that red floss. Floss can end up being somewhat translucent when it gets wet, so if you use a dark thread underneath it, it tends to darken up the floss. So generally anything, any color other than black, I'll use a white thread underneath it just so it doesn't darken it up. It tries to keep the color a little bit more appropriate under the water, or I should say more true. I'm going to run my thread about 2/3 the way down the hook shank. Cut my tag off. This is where I'll tie in the tag for our Ladykiller. The tag on this is a silver Mylar tinsel is what I'm using. This is a size 14 Danville Mylar tinsel. I'm going to tie this with the gold side up. That way when I start to actually wrap this and put the tag in, it will change over to the silver side. I'm going to attach it on the far side of the hook. Then I'm going to put about 4 or 5 wraps to secure that as I keep working down the hook shank. For the ease of tying in this tag, I like to turn the hook over, and then I don't have to constantly work around the thread. And then I'm going to wrap in 9 or 10 wraps of the tag. I want all of these wraps nice and touching. I'm going to secure that in with a wrap of thread over that and another wrap. Notice that I am still working my way down the hook shank, and that helps to minimize any bump in the back end of the body here. I'll cut the Mylar off for my tag, and now it's time to tie in the tail. The tail in the Ladykiller is just red Hackle fibers. I'm using some Hackle fibers from a whiting red American rooster cape. I like these because they're nice long fibers down here at the bottom, and the longer the fibers are, the more I can get those up into the body space, and it helps to keep just a nicer smooth body. If they abruptly end right back in here, you end up with a little bit of a bump. So I'll peel off a number of fibers, getting the tips of the fibers all nice and even. And I like to, instead of just keeping these curly the way they are right here, I like to go ahead and trim those off at an angle. This is going to help me to have a little bit smoother body. I'm going to tie these in. I'm going to measure these about half a shank length and tie those in. When I tie these in on top, notice that I'm still wrapping backwards just a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and put my rib in. The rib for the Ladykiller is also the Danville silver and gold size 14 Mylar tinsel. It's a silver rib, so like the tag, I'm going to attach this with the gold side out. Attach that on the far side of the hook and draw that down. One wrap to secure it. And then we'll tie in our body. The body is made up of red floss. I'm using a Danville 4-strand rayon red floss. And bring these up under the thread over to my side of the hook shank to secure those in. And then I'll draw these ends down so that the ends are going to be generally around, somewhere around the end of the body. I can trim those if they're a little bit longer. At this point, I'm going to start wrapping my thread forward to secure those in. Notice how I don't have a large bump back here in the back with all the tag and the rib and the body material all tied in at the same spot. You can flatten your thread out if you want to provide a little bit smoother underbody. Get my thread up here to the end of the body and the beginning of the head space, which is generally about 2 eye lengths back here behind the eye. I'm going to wrap in the body. This is a floss body, and I need to get all of the fibers under the same tension as I wrap this forward so I have a nice smooth body to the fly. I'm going to wrap these in, and as I do, each wrap is going to overlap the previous wrap about halfway. Gives me a nice consistent body as well as generally a smoother body. Catch in the remaining floss to secure the body and trim away the excess. Now I can go ahead and put the rib in. When I add the rib to the fly, I just want to make certain that all of my wraps are evenly spaced. It usually puts in about 11 or 12 wraps for me. You may like a little bit more, a little bit less. I think somewhere around 10 to 12 is kind of more traditional, but at the same time, it's more important that you have these nice and evenly spaced. That with 3 wraps of thread, and I can trim away the excess tinsel. So at this point, the body for the Ladykiller is done. Generally, I'm done with my white thread, so I can change this over to black. For the underbody here, I used a white flat nylon thread. It's a larger, bulkier thread to be able to move from one end of the shank to the other a little bit faster. For the rest of the fly, I'm just using a 6/0 Danville in black. We don't want to use a big, bulky thread when we're putting the wing and the throat and all these various parts together. Otherwise, we end up with a head on the fly that's much larger than what we want. Tidy this up just a little bit, and now we are ready for the throat of the Ladykiller. The throat of the Ladykiller is made up of some white hackle fibers. I like to use schlappen feathers for these. They're a nice, long, soft hackle. I should say long and soft fibers, barbs on these feathers. What I'll do is take a schlappen feather, remove all of the fluffy bits on the lower section, and then single out some of the barbs from the stem like this. I want to get all of these so that the tips are nice and even, and then I'll just peel those right off. I'll do that on both sides, and then when I put those together, I'll have a nice clump of hackle fibers that are fairly flat and broad. You don't want these clumped together in a bunch. And then I can tie these in. The Ladykiller does not have a belly on this. A number of Carrie Stevens patterns will put some white bucktail in underneath as a belly, but this one does not. So we're just going to go ahead and tie the throat in. I have it so that the hackle fibers are about halfway down the shank. I'll hold those underneath, one pinch wrap underneath and pull up and put in about 5 or 6 wraps just to secure that, and then I can take a look at it. I want to make certain that not all of them got in there. I want to make certain that it's right on the bottom of the hook shank. I don't want it canted to one side or the other. And that one looks pretty good. Now we can cut the butt ends of this off. When you cut these off, you don't want to cut them tight right up against your thread wraps. At least I don't, because if you do, then you're going to have the real short butt ends right down here that when you wrap thread over it, it starts to build a little bulk under here. We want to cut these so that they're a little tapered so that we can't avoid a little bit of bulk back here, but we can taper that forward so the overall head, when we're done, will have a better shape. So that gives me just a little bit still sticking out, and I can use my thread to wrap that down. Start bringing those wraps forward and wrap all those fibers down, and you'll notice that they lay a little bit flatter underneath, and I'm building a little bit more taper underneath the head on the underside so that the resulting head doesn't end up being too large. I'm going to tidy this up here a little bit. Ladykiller also does not have an underwing. Many of her flies will have an underwing of peacock curl, but this one does not. The Ladykiller's wing is comprised of yellow hackle fibers flanked by white hackle fibers. So there's 2 yellow hackle fibers, 1 for each wing. They're flanked by a white hackle fiber on the outside of each. And then the shoulder on the Ladykiller is actually a red or a chicken breast feather dyed red. I do not have any chicken breast feathers. This is actually a whiting soft hackle. They call it a BLW, or a black laced wing, dyed red. So I'm just going to go ahead and use this. I find it interesting, actually. The contrast with the black in there I think is kind of nice. I'm going to see if I can acquire just some regular breast feathers and dye some red. But I'm interested to see this next season how this fly does. I kind of like the black in there. And then, like a lot of her flies, there is a jungle cock eye for the actual cheek of the fly. So I've actually processed mine and glued these together. All I have to do is put these together right here at the base so that the bases match up like this. That lets me see where my wings, or the tips of the wings, are. I generally like to have the tips even, more even than the base down here. I can always wrap a little bit back on those or peel a little more off to make certain that my tips are going to be more even. Once I have those the way I want, I'm going to cut the excess off here, but I'm going to cut these and still leave these long. You'll see why in just a second. And then I have my wing ready to tie in. I'm going to separate the 2 wings and then bring the 2 wings down on both sides of the hook like this. Many people, and I'm guilty of it as well, when tying these flies, will tie in the hackles individually. They tend to hold them in their left hand like this and then just bring them straight down on top of the hook. The problem with that is that these barbs and things like this on the feather on the bottom side, I like to have some going down below the hook shank here. But if you just bring them straight down, then the whole wing tends to cant up like this when you tie the fly in. So I like to separate the 2, bring them down on both sides of the hook shank, and then tie them in basically with the rachis of the feather, the stem of the feather, right along the top of the hook shank. So these aren't sticking up at a abrupt angle off the hook shank. Once I have the base of the 2 feathers together on top here at the back of the head, I'll start wrapping this in. I'm just going to put in about 7 or 8 wraps just to secure that in there so that now I can see how this wing is setting. I want to make certain it's straight off the top of the hook shank. It isn't cocked to one side. Sometimes the feathers themselves might actually bend a little bit like this, and that's all right. When this swims in the water, it isn't going to be looking this nice. But I do want to make certain that both sides of the wing are on each side of the hook shank. That they are straight off of the hook shank. And they're matched up. I've got my shoulders off just a little bit there, so I'm going to unwrap these. And I'm going to match my wings up again so that the tops of the shoulders here match up on both sides. There. That looks better. Keep in mind, the fish are never going to be this finicky. But I do like to take the extra effort to put in a little bit of extra work just to make certain that the fly looks good. So we'll get that into position. And once again, we'll secure that in with a few wraps of thread just to secure it while we see how that is sitting. And again, that moved out of the way. There we go. Sometimes this is what it takes. You just go back and forth just a little bit. Sometimes they go in real easy, real smooth. But sometimes you just have to fiddle with it a little bit. Just take your time with it. Yeah, that looks a lot better. Now my shoulders are matching up. So that looks good. I will put in about a half dozen more wraps to secure that. Now I'm going to trim away the excess of the rachis here, or the stem of the feathers. I left these long intentionally so that I can choose where I'm going to clip these along the head space so that this will hopefully taper down towards the eye. If I clip them way back here near the threads, I'm going to end up with an abrupt ledge that I've got to then wrap and wrap and wrap thread on to cover that up. So I'm going to use the stems or the leftover bits of the feather here to kind of try and taper that down to the eye of the hook. And I'm going to wrap all of these in, securing those down real well. Remember, the purpose of the head of the fly is to cover up any butt ends of material and then give the fly a nice taper down to the eye of the hook. So generally speaking, you don't want to put in more wraps than you need to accomplish this. Extra wraps don't necessarily hold the fly together better. Then we'll smooth that off. There we go. And now I can go ahead and secure this. The head of the Ladykiller is actually comprised of black and red thread. There's equal bands of red, black, black. Oh, I have that backwards. Equal bands of black, red, black, red. So I am going to, as I do with most of these, I'm going to flatten my thread out here and put in a 9 or 10 turn whip finish just to smooth the underside of this off a little bit. Then I will attach my red thread and put in equal bands, 2 equal bands of red thread to the head of the Ladykiller. starting at the back of the head here. I'll go ahead and get, like I said, a 9 or 10 turn whip finish. This just helps to smooth off the head a little bit when we are actually putting the finish on the head to give it a nice smooth glossy finish. It just takes less coats of material to get all that nice and smooth if we take this step right here. So now I'm going to attach my red thread, and I like to, when I do this, do the front band first because I know where that's going to start right here behind the eye of the hook. I also prefer to use a razor blade when cutting the tag off because then my scissors don't leave a small little nub of thread that ends up sticking out there. I'm going to try and flatten this just a little bit just to try and keep it smooth, and I'm going to put in a band of red right behind the eye here that is about 1/4 the length of the head here. Keep in mind that you do not want to bulk this up, so I don't want to put in so many wraps that I start to get a larger profile right here where the red bands are than the black. Also keep in mind that this is all done, and the care that's being done in this is to make all this look really, really nice, mostly for the fisherman, not the fish. In other words, the fish aren't going to be that persnickety when it comes to seeing how the head of this fly is done. That's more for us. So with the front band done, now I will attach my white thread, my red thread, looking at that white tail, about halfway down the rest of the black area, a few wraps to secure it, and now I can build up just another red band right behind the first one, and I just want to build this up wide enough so that I end up with equal bands of black and red. Once I have that done, I will put in a 3 or 4 turn whip finish to smooth that off. Tighten that down. Again, use my razor here to give this just a nice trim right here at the base so that I don't end up with a little pigtail of thread right there, which I do have just a little bit. That's all right. So now the head is complete and the wing is looking good. We'll go ahead and start finishing the head. I'm going to put my first coat of head cement. This is some Fly Tight. It is a thin down head cement that will soak right into all of that thread, and in a moment it will secure it very, very well so that I can put a couple of coats of Hardest Hull on this. Hardest Hull is a clear finish that will seal the thread up very well and give it a nice smooth clear finish. We don't want to use a black lacquer on this because we have the wraps of red thread in there. So in a moment when that Fly Tight is dry, we will go ahead and put our Hardest Hull on there, and we'll finish up the Ladykiller. So the fly tight is all dried up on the head of the fly, so we're going to go ahead and start the process to gloss this over. When I can't use a black lacquer, I like to use a product called Hard as Hull. It's just a clear, hard lacquer that's put on here. I'm going to end up putting about 3 coats on this. As I put the first coat on here, it goes on fairly thick, but as it dries, it will actually thin and shrink down to the thread wraps. So you end up with being able to distinguish the thread wraps in the head of the fly. So that's why it usually takes about 3 wraps to get all of that done. But this will start the process right here. You can, that first coat you can go ahead and put on fairly thick. I got a few thread fibers that are sticking out here that what I'll end up doing when that gets hard, I will end up using a razor blade to go ahead and slice those out. When I have all of this done, it will be nice and smooth. The head will be all glossed over, and it'll look really nice. So that's the Ladykiller. As I mentioned, I have not found much of any information on this particular fly. In terms of the history of it, I just thought it was a very, very pretty fly. A number of Carrie Stevens patterns do have multiple thread wraps in the head. It was one of her signature tying things with her streamers, where she would generally put a red stripe right in the middle of the head. But this one had 2, which was a little bit different. And I like the yellow and red contrast on this fly. The cheek on this, the shoulder on this, I thought was just very pretty. So that's the last for a while. I'll be doing more Carrie Stevens patterns in the future, but right now in this series, that's the last Carrie Stevens pattern. That's the Ladykiller. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this video and not only learned a new pattern, but maybe learned some new techniques and a few new skills. If you like this video, please hit that thumbs up button below. You can support Dressed Irons by hitting the subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you get notified when new videos are published. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Until next time, remember, it's fly time. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.